What's up, STS Nation, and welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that brings you the very best guests in all of true crime. Great Scott, it's your True Crime Phil, a show so good it happens once a week, and it's happening today, right now. We are going to dive into a couple of the biggest stories going on in America. There's one that's really caught my attention in the last 24 hours, and that is related in an odd way, maybe or maybe not, to Alec Murdaugh, but that's how we learned of the name of Stephen Smith. And I'm going to ask these guys about it because we've gotten some really weird information. That is my legal definition, weird information that has come out in the last day or two, and I want to get these guys' take. Best guess, you know him by now. The man in the more mild Hawaiian shirt today, not quite as red as last week. America's most respected detective, Fil Waters. He spent decades in the law enforcement world, becoming an expert at obtaining criminal confessions, spending 23 years working as a homicide detective in the Houston PD, investigating more than 400 homicide cases, although a lot of people still seem to think that they could solve them better than Phil. Detective Fil Waters is also a Marine and the owner of Kindred Spirits Investigations, and he starred in the show The Investigator, and he's always got something else brewing. What that is, I don't know quite yet. Agent Scott Duffey, no bow tie this week. Phil and I were both devastated to see that, but he assures us the look will come back at some point. He is the director of Wilmington University's Criminal Justice Institute. He is a retired FBI agent out of Delaware, where he worked crime matters, including gangs, bank robberies, and fugitive task force cases for 20 years. Prior to the FBI, he served 5.5 years as a Pennsylvania police officer. The usual rigmarole. Please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. You can listen to us anywhere you listen to podcasts, and it sure would help if you left us a review on these audio platforms. We called out Brad. There's a new hashtag on our show, Buzz Off Brad. Gave me 1 star, which I don't mind. He told me I was a 2-bit host, but then he attacked STS Nation and said that they ask dumb questions. That's where I drew the line. I almost sent Fil and Scott after him, but the new hashtag for the show for him is Buzz Off Brad. But to counterbalance him, if you want to leave us a nice review where we are found on audio, that would be great. And my chief marketing officer, my wife, assures me once again, so it's the 17th week in a row she's assuring me, but the merchandise store is coming soon. Without further ado, Astra says hello from England, and we say hello back. And she says, I love how diverse this channel is. Abby, who wants to be adopted by Fil Waters, by Uncle Phil. She wants him to be his father. Hello from Nebraska, she says.
That is my wannabe adopted daughter, I believe, isn't it?
It is. That is her. And that is her in the flesh. And then we've got
it is.
Good morning from beautiful South Dakota. Very, very nice to get all these. Oh, well, look at this. I don't want to get right into this, but we'll throw this question out here. This is a curveball, nothing that I was planning to talk about. Sunix, just because she asked so nicely. Can you please ask your panel for their take on the new case in Colorado of the dentist accused of the poisoning murder of his wife? I saw that and I said, why do these guys think that they can get away with it every time? So, Phil, that's my question to you. Why do these guys, especially the dentist types, we've got a periodontist in Florida who hired a hitman, Charlie Adelson, who's about to go on trial to kill his sister's ex-husband. Why do these dentist types think that they can get away with it, Phil?
Well, when it's, I have seen this case. I was asked to provide some commentary about it, but whenever I see a case like this or a case involving a dentist, I always think about, I think it's the movie The Hangover, And wasn't the character in that, one of them was a dentist, and he kept trying to tell everybody that he's a real doctor, I think.
Do you remember, Scott? I don't remember exactly.
I think something along those lines. But it's a hilarious movie. And then there was Hangover 2 and 3 and 14 and whatever. But yeah, the dentist story, it's interesting. It's these kinds of cases are kind of like Groundhog Day. It's like these guys come up and they do the same crap, and they just try to find a different way to poison their loved one, whoever that may, whichever side of that coin they might be on, whether it's the husband or the wife. And it amazes me that I'm like you, Joel. I read these cases and I read the background on them, and you have these people that are, for all intents and purposes, they are normal, happy in their marriage. They have children. I think they've got 6 kids, if I'm not mistaken, in this particular case. And she was I believe the wife was the office manager for the dentist office. And of course, he was the main tooth guy and worked on everybody's choppers, they're in the area. And so for whatever reason, he gets infatuated with this woman and decides that he wants her, not his wife. And the only way to do that is to kill his wife. So he thinks he's going to systematically poison her and he's going to get away with it.
But Phil, let me stop you right there. So he meets a woman. It happens every day. Look, my dad is 90. He's in a nursing home. He still looks at people walking by. It just never ends. So why not just get the divorce, Phil? Why lace the drink and kill your spouse? I mean, this is why I poke fun of the dentist. Is it because they're well educated and they think they're smarter than Fil Waters and they're going to beat the detective and get away with it?
Well, I think there's a lot of that, right? And I always say that there's 3 motivations behind a murder. It's either sex, drugs, or money. In this particular case, it's going to be sex, i.e. the adulterous part of it, and then it's going to be money. So the answer to that question, Joel, is these guys don't want a divorce because they don't want to make the payout of what it's going to cost them to get the divorce. And remember, I think I'm correct here, where they've got 6 children. And I don't know what their ages are. I'm sure he looks like a young guy, so I'm sure there's a wide range of ages. Now, if you're going to look at paying child support on 6 children, that is motivation, at least in his mind, to just eliminate the problem, which is the wife. And that way, you get to keep the kids. You don't have to pay child support. You get your girlfriend, and life is wonderful. And that's what these guys are thinking. And they get tunneled on this. They are classic narcissists. They are in love with themselves and pleasing themselves and gratification. And this is the way they go about doing it. And they don't have any bones about killing somebody to get to where they want to be. So this is not certainly, I mean, we see these cases all the time. I mean, they use antifreeze. I saw one the other day, and this was the most unusual poisoning case that I've seen, where the woman, who was a nurse, by the way, used eye drops. So she was putting the Visine, I think, a couple of drops in the drink, in the juice, and it eventually killed her husband. And that stuff is very, very hard to find unless you're looking for it. In this case, I think he was using cyanide or something. I mean, it was kind of the traditional poisoning. And he goes on the interwebs, and I guess they think they can delete all this good stuff. But they go in there, and the first place they're going to go into the phone. They're going to dump the phone. They're going to go into any laptops, any computers, any hard drives. They're going to dump all that stuff. And they're going to find the trail, and they did in this case. They find the trail where he is researching poisons that cannot be detected at an autopsy. I mean, come on. So These guys, as smart as they are, they turn out to be some of the biggest idiots on the face of the planet.
And by the way, his name is James Craig. Her name is Angela Craig. They were married, I believe, over 20 years, and she is a mother of 6.
Yep.
A mother of 6, and was pronounced brain dead because of that. And this guy's not far from being brain dead for being such a dope, and he's going to spend the rest of his life in prison for that, if I'm allowed to say it. Abby, your stepdaughter, Phil, says, "Great Scott, it's finally Friday. Love Abby Taha Waters. Love you guys and love you, America." Shaquille Oatmeal writes,
well, she said it's finally Fil Friday, is what she said.
Fil Friday. You're right. Look at that. You're right.
And she spelled my name right. That's good.
Fil Friday. If she's going to be your stepdaughter, she better know how to spell your name. Shaquille Oatmeal. Hello. Best show ever. Can't wait for the merchandise. Just send your emails to the Chief Marketing Officer, Marie Hernandez, a friend of the show here. Cindy Neufeld, glad that you finally caught alive. And Phil Ketchup lives in South Florida. She writes, "Happy Aloha Friday, STS Nation and best guest." She lived in Hawaii and is a friend of the show. So
awesome. Aloha.
I'm sure she appreciates your attire. Susan writes, "Good morning from Colorado." Catherine, Aloha STS Ohana. I love it. Okay, so let's get into the Stephen Smith case. This is a young guy, 19 years old, openly gay. He is killed in 2015, well before all the Alec Murdaugh stuff really blows up. And this entire time, his mother, Sandy Smith, is saying, my son was murdered, my son was murdered, my son was murdered. They started to reopen the investigation, I believe, in 2021, but just in the last 48 hours, there have been some crazy developments here, and we've got 2 incredible investigators to ask them about it. So starting off here, I was in the middle of a podcast when this news broke that attorney Eric Bland, who's been on this show a few times, and Ronnie Richter, his partner, they represent Stephen Smith's mother, Sandy. They said Tuesday night during my podcast, not during the show, but while the show was on, that the head of SLED, Chief Mark Heel, told them by telephone that the death was considered a homicide, which is kind of an odd way to report it. And then, getting even stranger, this is where it takes a weird twist. A former trooper with the South Carolina Highway Patrol who investigated the death of 19-year-old Stephen Smith said on Wednesday that a rape kit was ordered just hours after his body was discovered on a rural Hampton County road in 2015. SLED announced this week they are investigating Smith's death as a homicide. Smith's death was initially investigated as a hit and run, but investigators said the evidence did not support that as a cause of death. Scott Duffey, you were with the FBI for many years. Would one ever order a rape kit to a hit and run if there wasn't some belief that something else had gone on? What's happening here?
Yeah, so having read that article, just like the trooper who was either lead or one of the investigators on the case, like he said, it was his first that he had ever heard a rape kit would have been ordered. Same way with me, having investigated accidents, and just before I left into the FBI, having been certified as an accident reconstructionist, it's would have never even thought of a rape kit. That's indicative of there's an allegation of a rape, a crime, a sexual assault that could or could not be part of the larger case, which is that of a murder. So there's a couple of things here. This is 8 years ago now, and the fact that this is just coming out through sources of a trooper, as opposed to any written account that's been in a police report or whatnot. So it will be quite interesting to see. So a rape kit is ordered. Was it actually executed? Was there the kit was actually completed? And of course, what's the outcome of it, and why has that not been in a part of this saga until now? So it just keeps growing in more peculiarity and strangeness with regards to how this has not been at the front of at least local news and law enforcement, and how it's become, 8 years of, and so of course law enforcement is already behind the 8 ball if they're having to go and rehash an 8-year-old case, and for example having to exhume the body, and so they're definitely playing catch up, and the rape kit is especially for something that had been requested early on in the investigation, really shows how at odds so many different parts of this were at the beginning.
Phil, let me ask you a question. When you were working Houston PD, if someone was killed in a hit and run, would you get called to the scene, or was that just I don't know, the traffic division, or would you get called out there since it, I suppose, resulted in a death?
No.
You wouldn't get called out.
I'm busting you again, Joel.
I love it.
Asking me those close-ended questions. No, we have at HPD, there is a vehicular crimes unit that goes out and works fatality accidents. And I have been called out on scenes that at first blush may have appeared to be a murder with a vehicle being used as the weapon, but then it turned out it was vehicular homicide, and as a result of the driver and what they did, not related to an actual murder. And then I've had the reverse of that, where we were called out that the investigators with vehicular investigation crimes thought that this was not an accident. It resulted in a death. It was something more nefarious. And I cannot think of one of those that has turned out to be what the vehicular crime investigator thought it was. So it turned out that it was not what they thought it was. But we got called out on them nonetheless. I would say regarding this particular case with this young man, the roadway where this occurred was just down the road from the property where Murdaugh executed his wife and his son. So it's in I believe I read that it's in that general area.
Yep.
And I say general area, but it's actually pretty close to the Murdaugh property. And in regards to a SANE test being done, a sexual assault kit, the trooper that worked it must have seen something at the scene that caused him to make that decision.
That was my next question. I mean,
yeah, it doesn't just happen in a vacuum. He didn't just pop up and go, maybe he knew the kid and knew that he was homosexual and that kind of thing and just said, well, I'm going to do it. There had to be something there at the scene that would indicate that this needed to be done. Now, what we don't have are the results of the SANE kit. We don't have the result of the testing. At least I haven't read where those results have been revealed. So there was something there. And then the case ends up.
I don't even know if we know who has the test kit or where it is at this point.
Well, exactly. So we don't know if that evidence, number one, if it was tested, because it was apparently collected because of what we've read here, but we don't know if it was tested. We don't know what the results were, and we don't know where it was tested. I would assume that it's going to get tested at the state lab at South Carolina, whatever their lab is for the SLED unit, for all those law enforcement folks in the state level. That's where it's going to go get tested. So it's my hope that information that is somewhere in their evidence room, in their property room. Now,
and how long can that sit there and still be tested in a kosher way for? How long can a rape kit sit around for, assuming they can even find this thing and then test it? Is there is there a shelf life on that or no?
No, in most of those cases, in fact, we had an issue at HPD at one point where a lot of sexual assault kits were being taken and they were just being stuck away and no testing was done at all. And it was quite a scandal at the time. And then when they started pulling all these sexual assault, just because they were overwhelmed. I mean, it wasn't somebody trying to do something wrong. It was just a huge bad judgment call because, just things started stacking up. Well, we'll get to that. And then they didn't get to that. And then they got thousands of these cases sitting there. So to answer your question, they started submitting those things and started getting results. So there is a possibility, of course, because they're stored in a manner in which the purpose is to preserve that evidence, because you may have to have it later on for retesting. You may have to have it if you've got enough to test. So if they've got the kit, and let's just say for the sake of our discussion, it was never tested, then bingo, we got to go back and test it and let's see what the results are. Now, the other side of that is, regardless of the results of the test, unless there is another affirmative link to what is now presumed to be a murder, a homicide, then if for the sake of the discussion, let's say they identified a profile and the persons who profile that belonged to was then identified. It does not mean that that's the person that murdered this young man. What that means is that that's the person who last had sex with this young man, but may not have been the person who took his life. So there has to be some other evidence that is going to link them to the person who left that sample.
Louise Rouleau, our friend up in the Great White North, Canada, says, hi, Fil and Scott. And lest anyone think we are not a global show, I think last week it was Mogadishu, Somalia, or the week before. This week we've got Ali from I Love You All from Iran. So welcome to Ali Semsar in Iran, watching all the way over there. Scott Duffey, to you, Michael Duncan, he is a former South Carolina Highway Patrol supervisor. He spoke with News Nation in an exclusive interview Wednesday night and says that troopers were never given the opportunity to provide their findings, and they received a call to stay back. He went on to say that a rape kit was ordered within 13 hours of Smith's body being discovered. He said it was unusual for a traffic accident investigation. How troubling is it, whatever this call was to stay back was all about?
Well, it is troubling, and I think we're not only seeing the right, they're trying to right a wrong by now declaring this a homicide, which now allows and opens up many doors and resources to reinvestigating and getting to the bottom of what took place. But at the same time, this just reeks of corruption. You have the powers that be, whoever they are, in whether it be in prosecutors' offices or investigative agencies, where we're 8 years later into what looks to be a homicide of an individual that's just swept under a rug. But this is just the beginning, and I would think not only in getting to the bottom of this and hopefully being able to identify who or how many involved in this young man's death. But I would think equally people who have knowledge and have tampered with evidence or at least pushed the right buttons in positions of authority in order to just make investigators who are asking really good questions why they're not allowed to go forward. So I think we're going to see a couple of different investigations, and one of them is getting to the bottom of the corruption that has swept this under the rug.
And Jay Thomas Reset, a friend of the show, says, I think SLED has some serious problems, and I think Jay may be onto something. Astra here writes, and this
Wait
is
a
not...
minute, let me make a comment about that.
Please do, Phil.
And it's good to see Hunter Biden under his synonym, Jay Reset there. That's good to see him. Just a joke.
The photo you're talking about. The photo?
A joke, Jay.
Yeah.
So, in regards to the comment about SLED having problems, I believe that South Carolina, so we have to remember there are two different divisions within the state agency. So the trooper that goes out and works what looked to be an accident, I do not believe is a member of SLED. So in Texas, we have DPS, Department of Public Safety. They're the troopers. They're the road roaches. They're the tire biters. They're the guys that are out there working the roads, working the accidents on the roads, and so forth and so on. But then we also, the investigative arm, one of the investigative arms of of DPS are the Texas Rangers. They're not out working vehicular crimes. They're working homicides. They're working murders. They're working those types of cases. So I believe there is a difference here in what SLED does and what the trooper was doing in the accident investigation. So now that SLED has the case and they are investigating it as a murder, so there is it's going to be very telling. And I think I've read somewhere where there was a comment from a representative from SLED who said they are making progress, or they have received some new information. But it looks like they have reopened this case, and it may be heading in a completely different direction. And I also believe that the ruling in terms of the manner of death was undetermined. So that's different from the cause. So the cause of death is what killed the person. The manner of death is the circumstance under which that person died. So it is a medical legal ruling. It does not have anything to do with the criminal law. So it is the pathologist is looking at the body, examining it, and then coming up with they're either going to rule it a natural, a suicide, an accident, a homicide, or undetermined. And I believe in this particular case, while the ME may have said something about it being a hit and run, I think the ultimate ruling on the manner of death is actually undetermined.
I'll have to double check that. But Astra writes, Law and Crime had a letter from Stephen Smith's mom to the FBI where she was told within 24 hours it was a shooting, a hit and run, and then a beating, but to continue to act like a hit and run. And we do know that Stephen Smith's mom fired off a letter to the FBI about the mishandling of her son's death investigation, saying that he was murdered for being gay and naming Buster Murdaugh as a possible suspect. And that's important because Buster Murdaugh put out a statement this week saying that he feels sorry for the Smith family, but he had absolutely nothing to do with it. The first time we heard from him on this matter, we'll get to that as well. It was a 4-page letter that Sandy Smith sent to the FBI in 2016, hoping the agency would take over the case from local South Carolina authorities whom she believed had covered up critical evidence in the case. right on cue, Victoria Powell writes, as we all know, here in South Carolina, depending on who you are, is depending on what will happen, i.e., a cover-up, aggressive investigation, indifference, etc. It's gotten better, but it still exists. So this is disturbing, to say the least. But this guy, Michael Duncan, who was interviewed by News Nation, a supervisor with the South Carolina Highway Patrol, went on to say, when it comes to traffic accidents, never, being asked about this rape kit being ordered. This was the very first time I ordered it. I did not have an understanding of why it was being ordered. We were not notified until later that it had been ordered. I have no answers for you as to why they would have ordered a rape kit for what would be suspected as a hit and run, which it wasn't. So, Scott, I think this former highway patrol supervisor is just underscoring the strangeness, the high strangeness of all this. It's being investigated as a hit and run. A rape kit is ordered. As Phil just said, he thinks the cause of death is still undetermined. How do you begin to untangle this, Scott?
I would think, like Phil, if you're a part of a case, unless you've been removed from that case and stricken from any access to a case, there are enough things being said that I'm trying to put myself in one of their shoes as an investigator. Somebody who shows up, somebody who's told to stand on the perimeter, or somebody who's told to go get a rape kit and deliver it to this person or that person. And so it seems like there are still quite a bit of pieces of this puzzle that are not yet disclosed with regards to, okay, now I have information and knowledge that a rape kit is ordered, but how do I not have information as to what the results are, and whether by speculation through another investigator or medical, personnel. So I'm still at this very confused stage, as if I was an investigator having one piece of this investigation and then all of a sudden it just disappeared, right? It's we're being told that it's a hit and run, so thereby investigators' hands are tied to pursue it any further as a homicide or any other pieces that may or may not be connected to the death. For example, the rape kit, and so where did that go? Even if there was an independent investigation of a sexual assault, why is that all of a sudden done? Even if it didn't contribute to the actual death. And so it just seems like there are different elements of this that all just seem to disappear. And my hope is that everything is recorded, does exist somewhere, and somebody's dusting it off the shelves and reevaluating, perhaps reexamining, and this will start to make sense to everybody. But it is amazing to see that there are these different elements coming out, and retired or active or whatever have you, people who had a piece of this, were a part of it, and to still be in the dark just as much as we were in the dark with regards to the outcome.
The sad part about this is if Alec Murdaugh was never tried and convicted, there is a good chance that this would never be coming out. So that's sort of the sad side of all of this. Cindy Neufeld writes, the whole town was, to that point, was terrified of the Murdaugh family. This is interesting because I thought the exact same thing. Julie Frew, who's in the UK, I believe, writes, everyone who's been talking about this case says the shoes come off if it is a hit and run. Is that true? Scott, I know you didn't work traffic or vehicular accidents, but everyone says, according to all the reports, his shoes were very loosely tied, and if it was a hit and run, his shoes would have been off. Do you know if that's necessarily true? Do you have
not 100%, but in my 5.5 years having worked accidents, and then of course right at the tail end of my patrol career, having gone to different accident reconstruction schools, absolutely, it's just think about the force, especially a car hitting an individual. Think about how if whether there's braking or not braking. So you have a car that's driving. If there's braking, so you have the dipping of the front. If you have acceleration, you have the car dipping upward. And so that's going to be where's the striking zone of a body. And so if a individual is struck at such force, they're coming right out of their shoes. And those shoes are often a sign of where the initial impact takes place, because the car is running right over those shoes, not dragging them, etc. So, for depending on the type of force and the speed, etc. Yeah, very easily you could see a pedestrian struck, and the shoes, them coming right out of their shoes, and that body's going to be carried with the car, but the shoes are going to remain pretty close to point of impact.
Good question, because I was wondering the same thing. Elf, we love you. She says, love these guys, love their insights. You too, Joel. It's okay. You didn't have to add me, but I appreciate it. And then Mike, just to show it's not just women saying this, Mike writes, good morning from Utah. Best guest ever seen on YouTube. That is true. That is a true statement. Phil, I want to get your take on this, because I like to, as you like to push my buttons, I like to push your buttons a little bit. First of all, Eric Bland, the attorney now representing Stephen Smith's family, says, we have a chance to right 8 years of wrongs, and we intend to do just that. So I want to know if it's ever too late to do the right thing, which sounds like a Fil Waters saying. And then I want to get back to this. So let's start there. Is it ever too late to do the right thing?
No.
Thank you. Next question. What would you do? And this is not a closed question. What would you do if your supervisor said, Fil Waters, stay back, and you knew that you probably shouldn't be staying back?
Well, I would do what I have always done, which it was easier for me to ask for forgiveness than it was permission. So if I'm in it, and I cannot recall a time that a supervisor told me to back off. I don't recall any of that ever occurring. However, I know that there were some investigative decisions that I made regarding some suspects, and I had a way that I was going to go to get this person into custody, get the interview done, and get that final push that I needed to charge this person with capital murder. And I know that I had my captain at the time, when he realized what I was doing, I'd already put it in motion. So it was, couldn't unring the bell, but he told me that you need to get that guy in custody as soon as possible, which I certainly did. Because as soon as possible is a very flexible term, right? So I was able to accomplish what I needed to. We got the suspect back. He got in the interview room for the second time, both non-custodial interviews, by the way. And he did return for the second interview because he needed to think about what was being said in the first one. And when he came back for the second one, we got the admission, we got the confession, and he was later convicted for capital murder.
In the cop movies, you always see the detective yelling at his superior. By the way, what rank was your superior in homicide?
Lieutenants.
So you'd never scream at your lieutenant and throw your badge down and say, "I'm out of here"? You'd never do that.
No,
So.
no. It was more if we got in those kind of discussions, it was more that they were about to throw their badge down and we're out of here. So I had one lieutenant that told me that I was unsupervisable.
Those are beautiful words.
But they liked it's a double-edged sword, right? They liked the results. So what do? They were in quite a conundrum, but it all worked out.
That will now go in your bio, the unsupervisable Fil Waters. Marina, our friend from the south of Spain, just got here. Hello from Spain. Hello to you. Scott Duffey, smart question here. Maybe not. I don't know. Janice Peace writes, maybe the rape kit was ordered just to try to figure out who he had been with last. Would you ever order a rape kit for that purpose alone? With a hello here from Denmark.
No. It just doesn't, absolutely not. I mean, a rape kit is used for an investigation of a crime, a sexual crime, sexual assault, rape, whatever have you, obviously some sort of sexual contact. And like Phil said at the beginning of the program, something was highly indicative that it's immediately seen and known to the investigators on scene that this was something beyond an accident investigation, pedestrian struck. So you have to have something there that at least rises to that level of hey, there's potential for sexual assault here. Why? Because it's something I see before me. And so thereby a rape kit. So rape kits are not used for just identification of sexual partners and what, absolutely not. And that's that.
That's a no. Crazy Ant, we all have one, writes, Sharon from South Africa, we love that. And look at this. It's a twofer. Estelle Pretorius, not to be confused, I always say this to her, with Oscar Pistorius. A crazy Uma from South Africa. Hello to you. Hello to you. And
I worked a security op in South Africa.
What's that?
I worked a security op in South Africa for an oil man that I was providing security for.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Look, you learn something new about Phil every show. I did not know that. So now we do. Anjanette Levy, who's a frequent guest on the show and works for Law and Crime, she tweeted this out, and I'd like to get Fil and Scott's take on this. She tweeted out, when South Carolina Highway Patrol and others arrived on scene, the reports say troopers and agents believed it was a homicide, that Stephen Smith had been shot in the head. Hours later, during the autopsy, Dr. Aaron Presnell said that Stephen Smith died from head trauma caused by a vehicle hit and run. Manner of death, as Phil had said, undetermined. Troopers, agents, and the Hampton County coroner did not believe that, and Presnell became defensive when challenged. Fingernail clippings were taken along with swabs of Stephen's genital area. These are all things that are done during an autopsy for a death that appears to be the result of foul play. This could help pinpoint the killer. And she says, I think the real question should be, why was Dr. Presnell so resistant to explaining her findings? She told troopers it was their job to determine what killed Stephen. Actually, it's her job to assist with that. Why on earth list manner undetermined? What about, Phil, the fact here that Anjanette is saying that this Dr. Aaron Presnell, who conducted the autopsy, was kind of fighting the findings against or challenging it, became defensive when questioned about it. What about this notion?
Well, the obvious implication is that there was some undue influence on that particular pathologist to come up with a desired result. And we now know we're getting to know more and more about the Murdaugh reputation and the power that they wielded in that particular county. And so I don't think it's any surprise that this coroner is getting a little defensive, because it does not look good. Now you're looking at, of course, hindsight's always 20/20, the old saying, right? And now not only is it 20/20, but we're looking at it through a different prism based on the conviction with Alex Murdaugh. And I've said it before, this family has got dead bodies all around it. And so they're looking into the housekeeper that fell down the stairs. And you've got a bunch of bodies laying around here that may have other explanations as to the manner in which they died. So I think my questions are really about this sexual assault kit. If it was taken, well, where did it go? If we had investigators on the scene and we had the troopers that were working the scene, that were working I would imagine the way this thing went, at least in my experience, is that the state troopers were called out, which is what we're talking about here, the guys that work the accidents. They got there and something didn't look right. So at that point in time, perhaps if they're saying there were agents there, then that means that SLED was notified and provided their agents, just in the same way that I would get called out by vehicular crime investigators. So they're all there, and someone made the decision to have this sexual assault kit done. That trooper did. 13 hours later, because I would just imagine, of course, I don't know, this is just pure speculation on my part, but having been in those kind of scenarios, that they all put their investigative heads together and decided that, look, this doesn't look like what it is supposed to look like. And then when you get the ME, the coroner, who conducts the autopsy, and the guys on the scene, apparently, didn't you just say that they thought he had been shot in the head?
That's what the tweet said.
I can tell you, there have been a lot of times where I've gone to scenes and we're looking at the body laying there at the scene. Now, I don't touch the body, because the body doesn't belong to me. The body belongs to the medical examiner. And they send their investigators out. And they may even send one of the pathologists out. And they're the ones that are looking at the body. I'm standing there. I'm making my notes. I'm looking at everything. They're turning the body over. We're trying to see where the wounds are, what type of wounds, and so forth and so on. There have been many times where we have looked at a body on the scene and get it down to the morgue, and they start cutting on it, and it's not at all what we thought at the scene. So that happens. That's just.
So Phil, you never touch a body. You have the medical examiners, investigators turn over the body.
The body does not belong to me.
So if you want to see the backside of the body, you would ask the medical examiners, investigators to turn that body over for you?
Yes. We have to wait at the scene for the medical examiners and their investigators to show up before the body is ever touched.
Kevin Callahan writes, Joel, is it true that wannabe cop Alex Murdaugh showed up on that scene of that so-called hit and run? Of course, we saw him in the hospital after the Mallory Beach boat accident, flashing his badge. I do not know the answer to this question. I don't know that Scott or Phil know the answer to this question.
I'll tell you what, that's a good question, though.
Yeah.
That's a good question, because it was right down the road from their house. So that's a good question. That's a great
question. Wrote that it's only less than 2 miles away. Yeah. Here's another good question, I think, for Scott. What happened to Stephen's phone? I don't think there's an answer to that as far as I know, but Scott, I assume that's something you would want to dig into. But let me ask you a question. In 2023, Scott, shouldn't we feel comfortable knowing that authorities are going to do the right thing? Or are we still in a time and day where a family with major influence could influence a homicide investigation? I thought we were beyond that. No?
No, we're not.
Am I naive? Am I naive, Scott?
I would say just a little bit. So we're the country is a big country, and there are lots of little pockets and vacuum communities that there's a lot of power, and things can go the way that those who are in power that they want it to. If in fact something bad looks like it's going to tear away a little bit from that power of the powers that be, right? It's corruption, and corruption exists. Corruption exists at all levels, and it's something that's been around as long as humans have been around. So it's it makes it more interesting, and I think corruption has to be a part of the process here when something that seems so obvious to some very credible, hardworking detectives doing their job say this is something that's different than what the original call was of a hit and run, and then all of a sudden, the powers that be stay back, whoever they are that stay back. Getting to a supervisor. What do you do when a supervisor says stay back? I mean, obstruction of justice is for everybody. It is for those involved in the investigation as well as those who are trying to simply protect a loved one or whatnot from being interviewed or standing in the way of simply allowing justice to have its day. And so, if a supervisor or anybody in an investigation that says stand back without due cause, as opposed to, hey, I have limited resources and we are getting killed with, gun violence or this or that. So let the medical examiner's office do their job. Let the accident investigators do their job, and then let's move on. That's one thing. But for, in a small community where I can't imagine that homicides are just happening each and every day, and you have your limited resources and your accident homicide by vehicles are just through the roof, and you have a very small group of trying to just put the pieces together. This seems like something, especially as information comes out, that there were some very high people in power that had managed to make this temporarily go away. I mean, 8 years is a long time, but still, at the same point, it's being brought back to where it needs to be, and an investigation now that's under a microscope. The whole nation is watching. So you have a tremendous amount of resources being provided to hopefully come up with the right answer that should have been provided at 8 years ago.
And Penny writes, I love the sliding barn door behind you, Scott, followed by Cindy, who writes, awesome show as always. Scott, notice the word Phil is not in there, is so respectful. I admire that. XOXO. Phil, let's get you in trouble today. Ronnie Richter, the partner of Eric Bland, the lawyers representing Sandy Smith's family, say that, and I quote, this case has nothing to do with Buster Murdoch, but at the same time, Sandy Smith, the mother, was implying that it did. She went on to say, I could not have imagined when we began this fundraiser. She's talking about a GoFundMe that I think raised well over $68,000 by this point, would take off the way it did. Thank you for not allowing Stephen's story to be swept under a rug. We will pursue the exhumation immediately and provide updates along the way. I guess my question is, the lawyers, I think, are being smart. They're saying we don't want to point fingers right now because this investigation has to play out. But the mother was pretty firm and pointing her fingers toward the Murdoch family. How do you negotiate that? Do we have to wait for the evidence to point us in the right direction?
Well, my first comment is the lawyers need to keep their mouths shut. But lawyers think they need to go out there and say something. in this particular case, I believe I read where the mother in 2016 had written a letter implicating Buster Murdaugh. Did I
Yeah.
read that? Is that
Yes.
something that happened?
Yeah, that's something that did happen.
So the fact that he's now coming out and saying we don't believe Buster Murdaugh, I mean, there's sometimes where you just don't need to say anything. I think this is one of those times. And again, we're now in a situation here where there's been a lot revealed as a result of Alex Murdaugh's conviction and that trial. And you've got Buster, who has come out and he's made this very, vehemently denying. I think he used the word unequivocally. Of course, when we start using those LY words, right, we got to listen to what's coming next because they're going to justify what they're saying here. So, and again, this is going to be another case where it looks like I'm going to bet this thing was sitting on somebody's desk somewhere for 8 years. That this hasn't just been laying dormant, and they were picking it up and they were looking at it. They're going, something just isn't right here. And whatever happened. So when I went to autopsies, I was present. I was present for almost every autopsy on every scene that I went to. And that was to provide the ME with all of the investigative information that I had at that moment to give them a better idea of what happened so that they could come to the proper ruling. I don't know if that's what they did in this case or if that's what they do in South Carolina. I would be a little surprised if they looked at this as an accident that they didn't show up for the autopsy, the state troopers. But if they had agents there from SLED who believed this was a homicide, this was a murder, then they would have been at the autopsy. So there's so much stuff about this particular case that we just do not know. And I'm hesitant to get into a lot of detailed stuff because I don't know. And I don't want to speculate about stuff, although I have been doing it, but just based on what I know about the case and what's been released. So I think we're going to find some twists and turns in this thing. And it's going to be, look, when we get in these investigations, these homicide investigations, homicide cops, the first thing they start doing is peeling back the onion on these people's lives, the ones involved in it. And I can tell you in most cases, they peel back that onion, I peel back that onion, and eventually the onion starts to stink. And then you get to the point where sometimes you start to cry. So we are in the early stages now in this particular case of peeling that onion. And it's just going to be, I think there's going to be some things that come out that are going to be very revealing about the Murdaugh family, the politics within that county as it affected different officials within the county and so forth and so on. So I think there's a whole lot of stink fixing to come as this onion gets peeled.
Sherry's News writes, totally agree with Scott. A rape kit is more involved than just a quick test. Would be interested in knowing why and what was discovered, followed by another question from her. Since it's been a while, can the cuttings under the fingernails show DNA? I believe the answer to that, Scott, is yes, right? That's why they clip the nails?
Yeah, as long as it's preserved the way it should be as an evidence collector, it can, just like these kits that through no fault of a police department, they can lay around for decades. And then all of a sudden, something, resources and whatnot, and all of a sudden they get tested and good evidence is recovered as a result. So same thing, anything that is properly preserved and stored, there will be in my issue or my mind, no diminishing of anything, as long as it's properly collected and stored.
And then there's this detail, which is interesting from Andrea. Wasn't it strange that Stephen left his wallet and phone in the car? Doesn't it suggest he was taken from his car? Did he really run out of gas, or was he deliberately run off the road? Phil, you're an investigator. I'm not. What does that tell you?
Well, again, I mean, I don't know the whole circumstances of the scene.
Mhm.
So that in isolation, there could be several reasons why. He could have met somebody out there on the road. He could have gotten out of the car. I mean, there, I mean, we can go off into all sorts of directions with just that one particular fact. So I mean, I don't know. I don't know.
And Lisa's saying the same thing. His phone and keys were with him. His wallet was left in the car. Oh, so she's saying something a little different. So, Scott, to you too. SLED reopened the investigation into his death in June 2021, saying that they had come across new information while investigating the shootings of Maggie and Paul, but they never disclosed what that information was. So this percolating, all this bubbling to the surface, actually, it started obviously the night of the incident, which was in 2015, but then June 2021 they reopened the case again. I mean, something just doesn't seem right here at all. Do you think that we get an honest answer as to what happened, or is too much time passed right now?
I mean, time hurts, but no, I think it's very important to first and foremost have reclassified, right, as a homicide, as a new investigation, and so all the right resources are going to be poured into this, and it's there are many things that are not said, and so maybe they're even taking a cue from what has been not reported or reported, and so thereby, hey, we're going to have to get this right, and we're going to have to do it in a way that with telling as least as possible out to the public. So kudos to them for sticking with this and going forward and keeping things close to the vest, because they realized what has happened already 8 years ago. It got swept under the rug, and there was a lot. It seems like there was a lot of information swirling. And if I could get back to this letter to the FBI, if that's a true statement and a letter was in fact written to the FBI, and yet a couple of things could happen that way, as I have seen many letters getting written to us, and it asks us to take over. We'd never take over anything, especially for something that is not in our jurisdiction to begin with. But here, you have, if that letter is written, and it is written in a way that, the mother is saying my son was killed as a result of, and here being, for all intents and purposes, a hate crime. My son was killed as a result of his sexual orientation, hence a hate crime. Yeah, the FBI would have jurisdiction to begin an investigation, to open up a preliminary investigation, to figure out, hey, what is being done, and is our assistance requested. And so I could see this going a couple of different ways. Is it possible that a letter got written, never made it to the FBI office? That's all, the FBI, of course, is not going to comment one way or another. But often I can tell you, just for the sake of, if that letter is received within the FBI, it gets cataloged, it gets filed away, and often a supervisor would look at the letter, the merits of the letter, and if need be, to send an agent out to find out additional details from the letter writer. And so that's there may be information there, especially with law enforcement now reopening this case. Trust me, they're going to their FBI counterparts to say, is this letter has been written and what has been done as a result? So yes, time hurts. Absolutely. There are missteps and possibly things that are lost. For example, is it possible that somebody remembered a rape kit being ordered, but the end result will be this rape kit doesn't exist? And so thereby you'll have this conspiracy theories and thoughts of, well, was it ever ordered, or is it just somebody saying something? So hopefully these things exist, are being examined, re-examined, and ultimately, 8 years ago, there seems like there was a political stranglehold over investigations, right? And so if the death of Stephen even hinted at detracting from the reputation of the Murdaugh family in 2015, they were as powerful can be. But then 2021, and of course now today 2023, things are different. Their stronghold is no longer there, and so thereby the right people are in place to do right.
Phyllis Barr, hi from Jerusalem, Israel, the holy city, the holy land. Hello to you, Phyllis.
Shalom.
Shalom. Jessica writes, whole lot of stink going on here. Marina asked, did Fil and Scott believe something will come out of this investigation? And I think they do. I think they've just answered that question. Eric Bland said, what we're going to do is start over. We're going to hire experts who are going to come into this case with a fresh set of eyes, with an open mind, without any preconceived conclusions, being objective, and wherever the facts go, that's where the investigation will go. And Eric Bland will go to Surviving the Survivor on Tuesday night. He's going to be our guest. We are trying to get him on with Mark Tinsley, Mallory Beach's attorney. That will be Tuesday evening, 7 p.m. Eastern time. But Eric Bland is already booked, and obviously we're going to talk to him in depth about the Stephen Smith case. I just want to reiterate this, that Buster Murdaugh came out this week and said, and I quote here from Buster Murdaugh, I tried to ignore the vicious rumors about my involvement in Stephen Smith's traffic death that continue to be published in the media as I grieve over the brutal murders of my mother and brother. These baseless rumors of my involvement with Stephen and his death are false. I unequivocally deny any involvement in his death, and my heart goes out to the Smith family. I think no matter what we think of the Murdaughs, until the evidence points officially in one direction or another, that we do in fact need to leave Buster alone and let him get on with his life, which can't be too pleasant right now. You got to feel for him on some level, knowing that his mother and brother just left planet Earth, and his father will not be available to him nearly in the same way that he once was, being that he will be spending the rest of his life behind bars. There is some other news. Let's pop around that for the remaining moments. The evildoer, as Fil Waters refers to him, but I have to say his name occasionally, Brian Kohberger. Prosecutors have not said if they're going to seek the death penalty in his case. Legal experts do say it's likely, and there is an issue afoot in the great state of Idaho that they're having trouble getting chemicals to, as Phil says, rehabilitate people. That is a euphemism for the death penalty. So a bill passed the state legislature this week for a firing squad, and now it has to be signed off by the governor, which he is expected to do. State Representative Bruce Skaug said officials cannot get hold of lethal drugs, so firing squads are, quote unquote, the best course that we can take to carry out justice. Fil Waters, I hate to put you on the spot, but if it got to that point, and if the evildoer was convicted, and if he was put in front of a firing squad, is that barbaric in your eyes, or is that the justice system?
Oh, no, I don't think it's barbaric. Actually, a firing squad is one of the more efficient means by which to rehabilitate someone. So, I mean, I'm sure people think it is, and so forth and so on, but I don't. I mean, there have been. I think is it Utah? We've talked about this before. Gary Gilmore was his name, I think, that chose the firing squad and there have been several. There have been firing squad executions in recent history, so recent memory. So
forgive my ignorance on this. How does this work without getting too graphic? It's a group of shooters. Is there only one live round of ammunition? How does it work? So they don't know who's firing the actual round? Do we know how it works?
I have heard that. I don't know to a certainty that that's the case, that you have, let's just say, 8 marksmen, 6 marksmen, and they're all using the same type of weapon, same type of ammunition, and one of them only has the true round. Because I would have to believe that, look, I've been around guns and fired guns all my life. I was a firearms instructor. If you get a round that's loaded with a certain powder and it doesn't have a projectile in it, if it's a blank, essentially, the recoil effect, everything about it's going to be different. So I don't know if that's an old wives' tale, or I don't know. So that would be something to Google and find out the answer to that question. Unless Scott knows, I don't know.
Whoever this is says Utah was the last state to use a firing squad. They exploded his head. That's probably more than we needed to know. But then they wrote something else here, which I thought was interesting. 5 volunteers, only 1 live round, 4 blanks, 10 guns for backup. They trained for months in advance, cost about $20,000. I'm not sure if that is in fact accurate, but this person
is that in Utah? Is that in Utah?
Yeah, he was referring to Utah, I believe, but This sounds right, and I will look this up as a matter of principle. I will look it up, and then Jessica K says, why can't they just use a sniper instead of a squad? More efficient, effective. I think it's because they don't want to put the burden onto one person, and that is why they use perhaps just 1 live round, so the person doesn't even know. Phil, if you're firing a weapon without a live round, would you know that it's not a live round by the heft? Or
well, I would think so. I mean, I've had squib loads where you have a malfunction, and what happens is there's not enough powder to put the projectile out the end of the muzzle, and it just kind of does a. So I have fired blank rounds. When I was in the Marines, we would do field exercises, war games, that kind of thing. We would use blanks in our M16s. It's just not the same as firing a loaded up cartridge that's sending a projectile out of the end of that weapon. So in my experience, if you're an experienced marksman and have handled firearms, you're going to be able to tell the difference, unless they just load them up to the point where they're trying to simulate the same type of recoil effect, which I guess is possible.
And then moving on to the other big Idaho case, obviously that is the Lori Vallow Daybell case. The trial is getting set to start in about a week's time. Jury selection, I can't believe it, I think is coming up this week, if I am correct about that. Jury selection in the Lori Vallow Daybell case. But the big news out of there, speaking of the death penalty, Scott Duffey, is the judge took the death penalty off the table for Lori Vallow Daybell. It is still to be determined whether her co-conspirator, who's being tried separately, Chad Daybell, could potentially be put to death. But let me ask you, I know you're not an attorney, but you've been in the courtroom so many times. How does the fact that she does not facing the death penalty, I can't speak English today, I have a head cold. The fact that death penalty is off the table, how will it impact the defense strategy, if at all?
That's a tough one to answer for me. It's
before you answer it, let me say thank you, Mary. She's a new subscriber, great channel. Thank you very much. Sorry, Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, it's a tough one. Yes, are you removing something of a higher degree of fear and ultimately a great prosecution with all their resources and tools at hand? How many times I'll with the prosecutor team to be able to say, hey, if you plead guilty, if you do this, if you do that, you're going to get this instead of that, and so the defendant with their defense team is weighing those options and then make a decision, right? It's easier for a prosecutor to be able to say we have all of this, including death penalty at our disposal, um, but life in jail without the possibility of parole and whatnot is just as big as a card to play. And so, I don't think it necessarily um, uh, I don't think it prevents the prosecution from getting anything more they want with removing the death penalty in her specific circumstance. It just, from what I've seen, and especially in the cases I've worked, Delaware, federally, and state, that we didn't have that option, and I just never knew anything different. That as long as you present a great case with great evidence, um, life in jail is life in jail.
Yeah, and by the way, she was moved to the Ada County Jail. We had Jessica Bublitz, who is a Boise, Idaho based attorney, and she said the Ada County Jail is no joke. It is not a fun place to be in. All this makeup that we've seen her putting on prior to her court appearances, we will likely not see again. That will not be allowed. And she's living a much harsher lifestyle since moving in there. I'm not the only one who likes to poke the bear, being Fil Waters. Carrie G writes, Phil, please explain again why it is so important that the Vallow Daybell trial be televised. Just kidding. But followed by this question,
Well,
Phil. Go ahead.
let me say something.
Phil has had a complete change of heart. He wants it all televised.
Oh, no, not at all. Not at all. In fact, I'm more firm in my position about that after this discussion. But anyway, the defense, in my experience, when I have had death penalty cases, the priority of the defense is to keep their client off of death row. So will this change the defense strategy? And what I have seen is that it may very well, because now they do not have to, their focus is not keeping her off of death row. It's trying to explain why she did what she did in the hopes that there may be some mitigation to minimize, if she's convicted, to minimize the sentencing. So it will change the defense strategy on how they're going to approach her defense in this prosecution if the death penalty is off the table. And regarding the firing squad stuff, so I've been doing a little reading here. The typical firing squad, 5 people, and all but one of the weapons are loaded with live ammo. So that all participants in the firing squad have to fire their weapon. They just each don't know if theirs is the one that had the blank.
Interesting. That is an interesting approach. And someone else said,
and it's a shot in the heart. This business about blowing up somebody's head.
Yeah,
I don't know where they get that from, but they're all aiming at the heart.
And Phil, I don't mean to be gruesome, but how long does it take once you're shot right in the middle of that heart?
Oh, the death being, in fact, it is, like I said, it is one of the more efficient means of execution.
Wow. Rough way to end a Friday conversation here. Anita Butts, I thought this was a good question for Phil. I am Canadian, I believe that is. My eyesight's going, and proudly Catholic. I'm a retired Royal Canadian Mounted Police officer and a victim of a violent crime, and I cannot understand what closure one gets from killing someone else. Fil Waters.
So if I understand that right, she's talking about the
The firing
the
squad.
killer getting closure about killing someone else? Is that
I think she's asking why the death penalty? What kind of closure?
oh.
That's I believe.
Well, number one, I never use the word closure except in discussing the word closure. So there is no such thing. And I would tell people that would come to me, family members, friends that would come up to me at a scene and tell me that this is what they want. They want closure. And I would tell them, I cannot tell you that that's what's going to happen, because it will never happen. Because the place in your life and in your heart that has now been so tragically destroyed will never be filled again. So there is no closure. There'll be a scar, but there will never be closure. And that the best that I could do, and that the effort that I would make, I would do everything with all of the powers that I had at my disposal, was to find the right person who did the wrong thing to their family, and in the hopes that there would be a measure of justice served, which would result in some peace for them. So in terms of, if that question is what that is about the death penalty, I can tell you that in my experience, the folks that I know that have family members that have gone to the death chamber and watched that carried out have walked out of there with that, a sense of peace. This is finally done. And this person who did this evil act has been held responsible for what they did. These are the consequences for what they did. So the folks that want to get into this discussion about selective moral outrage, about the death penalty, well, I'm not gonna, well, to me,
Phil said, you know what? I don't want to get 8,000 hate emails tonight.
well, these are the,
now he says,
no,
maybe I do want to get
it'll just
8,000.
uncork a whole other discussion that we don't have time for today. But I'm just saying that that's what happens in that chamber when that execution is carried out.
Christina Perosco writes, and she is a friend of the show. She appears here frequently. This is where society goes completely wrong. Everyone lining up with a firearm should have a live round. Death by firing squad means death from multiple bullets, not $20,000 either. It's one box of ammo from the corner store. Sounds like Christina is a proponent of the final rehabilitation there. Andy School, friend of the show, hit the like button, STS Nation. I love this comment right here from Lucy the Bengal. I found the show when the Idaho case just broke. So happy I did. My favorite podcast, truly with the best guests. That is definitely true. I have learned so much. I have never missed a show, and that's why I like hosting the show, because I learn a lot too. A final question to both of you gentlemen. Kay Vallow Woodcock, the grandmother of the two young victims in the Lori Vallow Daybell saga, has been coming into our chat room during the show, and she is she's devastated. Scott, how hard is it for you, as you're approaching a trial and the victims' families are just really suffering, and the pressure of the moment is coming, especially when it's high profile, things are changing. Now she's devastated that the death penalty is off the table. She wanted that final closure, even though people say not to use that word. But how difficult is it for you, the investigator, and them, the victim?
Well, I think Phil touched upon it earlier when you really let them know what is closure. It's a very difficult, and I like his term with regards to peace of mind. And so everybody has to have peace of mind, peace of heart, and whether or not whatever it is that you believe or don't believe, that ultimately, justice was served on this earth as best as the justice system can serve. So it is very difficult talking to a victim and being able to hold them by the hand, as figuratively and literally, with regards to bringing them through a case, especially when a case is takes a long time and there's a lot of administrative and hiccups and obstacles, and draws it out. So that's where not only is compassion required, but at the same time, the resources that are afforded the justice system with good victim advocates who can be there at every phone call or whatever it is to help them answer questions as best as possible, while an investigator also does their job in trying to prepare for a trial and gathering witnesses. So, I mean, that is part of what we do, and going to a scene, seeing the most unseeable, right? You can never unsee what you've seen, and then to be able to take that and say, those are my marching orders to go forward and seek justice, whatever that justice may be, and to bring some sense of peace to the surviving victims that they can then take with them to end of times, whatever it is. I mean, this is raw, right? It is the justice system, all the aspects of it, and that is living victims who now have to move forward as best as they can, and hopefully the justice system is better equipped today to help people do that.
That calming, soothing voice of reason is Agent Scott Duffey, the director now of Wilmington University's Criminal Justice Institute. Scott is a retired FBI agent out of Delaware. He handled all sorts of crime matters, gangs, bank robberies, and fugitive task force cases for more than 20 years. He began his career as a Pennsylvania police officer, did that for 5.5 years. Carolyn A. writes, Fil Waters, I feel guilty, but my stance on the death penalty is changing with all these horrific murders, especially where children are involved. A lot of people struggling with their thoughts on this. Anita says, I'm opposed to the death penalty, and I do not believe that victims get peace from that. Jessica writes, correct the consequences, need to be more prevalent to these evildoers. Another person, I wish I could find it, wrote, Fil Waters is a badass. I might tend to agree with that as well, with his Hawaiian shirt. I don't know what question this was, but I'll put it out there because she said, great question, Joel. So thank you. I appreciate that. And here, this is true. Christina writes, Kay, she is a frontline warrior. Kay Vala Woodcock, I don't know how old she is. She's not young. She's not too old, but she's certainly not young. And she's on here every day when we have our shows, making her points about her grandchildren. And that takes a certain kind of strength and a certain person. So may strength be with Kay Vala Woodcock. Phil, any final thoughts on all of this insanity that we call life?
Well, I would just say this, and this is a quote when I was in firearms instructor school at DPS in Austin, Texas, and the old trooper that was teaching that course, and he was kind of a legendary guy, and he started to teach us the course on how to be a proficient marksman. And of course, law enforcement, we're not trained to shoot them in the arm or shoot them in the leg or shoot the gun out of their hand and all that good stuff. We are trained to terminate the threat if we are in fear of serious bodily injury or death. And that applies to third party as well. So with this discussion about the death penalty, which is kind of all encompassing what I'm about to say. This was the quote that he told us when he first started that class, and I think it applies to our discussion today. He said, "Let me tell you something. There are just some people out there that need killing." So I'll leave it at that.
Christina writes, "This is America, though. A fair trial, then the decision of your peers or a judge. Either way, afterwards, you're going to meet Jesus and you will get what you deserve." Followed by Sandy Gregg, "I can still hear my father yelling, 'Great Scott.'" And that's why I named the show Great Scott. It's your true crime Phil. It was actually the only combination of Scott and Phil that I could come up with. So hence the name, but I thought it harkened back to a different time and day. And even though these are both young men, relatively speaking, Phil and Scott, they see things with a wise and sage view. So hence the name Great Scott. It's your true crime Phil. So I like to hear that comment. Jessica says, "Amen, Phil." Maui Swift says, "Phil." Christina says, "Preaching gospel, Phil." Look at this. Mary says, "Amen" on that last comment. Trust me, there will be some hate coming our way too. Andy writes, "I understand what Phil is saying. Times have evolved. We just have to make sure there isn't corruption or human errors leading to wrong." Andy's school obviously has a level head there. That is true.
Well, the only disagreement I would have with what Andy says here is we haven't evolved at all. We are what we are. So, but the rest of it, I would tend to agree with.
And Marie Hernandez, she sums it up. "Great discussion this afternoon," followed by Penny Frick. "Every show is great. Thank you. That's because we have the best guests in all of true crime." Speaking of that, Sunday night live, 8 p.m. Eastern time. I believe we're going to be doing something on the Lori Vallow Daybell case. I am recovering from whatever my 3 beautiful kids gave me that's going around their school. So I'm not on top of everything. But this woman, it's hard to be a weatherman. This woman will be joining us Sunday night live, 7 p.m. Eastern time. Carm on the case. And then listen to this. Monday, we're going to have the director of the Netflix documentary, Sins of Our Mother, Sky Borg, on the program about the Lori Vallow Daybell case. So we will tweet out. You can follow me at Podcast STS, the time for that show on Monday. And then Tuesday, Eric Bland, we hope his knee is feeling better. He had a full knee replacement, and he's on the mend right now. He said it was the most painful thing in the world. So we hope Eric gets better, and we will see you all back here Sunday night, live, 7 p.m. Christina says, "Carm." And someone else says, Lisa says, "Mom." And Penny says, "Oh no, feel better, Joel." That's why I'm doing a 40-minute outro here. Love you, America. Love you, Delaware, Wilmington, Delaware, and love you, Houston, Texas.